Hello, my name is Eric Schares, and I'm here to provide a brief overview of Unsub, the collection analysis tool from our research. So let me share my screen, and we will walk through some of the things that Unsub can do for you. So Unsub starts with this Setup tab, and that's where you upload your counter files. So there are 3 counter files you'll need to upload if you're using the Counter 5 standard, which is the most recent standard. There's the TRJ2, the TRJ3, and the TRJ4 files. So J2 is the turnaways. That's how often someone from your institution is trying to access content from this publisher, but was denied. So that's something you don't have access to. J3 talks about things you did have access to, but was it because of your subscription, or was it already available open access? And then J4 talks about only the subscription access, but what year was the thing your researcher tried to access published? So typically we will upload counter files from 1 complete calendar year. So at the end of 2024, you can upload your 2024 usage. And the J4 file down here will say, in 2024, how often did someone from your university or your consortium try to access something in a particular journal from 1982? How often did they want material from 2006? And that can kind of give you a sense of how valuable the back file of a particular journal is, again, to your particular researchers and in one particular year. So after you upload all these files, you get these files from the publisher that you're interested in analyzing. It takes a few minutes for Unsub to upload those and parse them, but then you'll see how many rows of useful data you've extracted. So that's the first major step, is uploading the counter files. And this is where Unsub gets all the information about the preferences and performance of your institution. Next, you'll upload the price list. This is typically given to you from the publisher. So these are the list prices. In this particular example, this was Elsevier. We only had 307 journal titles to consider. We did not have the big bundled deal. And so we're only looking at 307 titles, so I only uploaded the prices for those 307 titles. So you'll see I'm getting a warning message, not really an error, but a warning that says, hey, there's still a lot of journals that you didn't give me any information about. And that's because those weren't eligible to be canceled or continued in the first place. So I was ignoring them. Next is currency. You can set between analyzing things in dollars or pounds. And then if you had a big deal, you can input some parameters of your big deal here. So how much is the annual cost of the entire package? How fast will it grow? And then Unsub does some simple math and gives you the estimated calculation of how much that big deal will cost. And then we can compare that to what would it cost if you broke up the big deal and went individually title by title. One more thing to consider adding here is the post-termination access information. And so that means if you were to cancel a journal XYZ, a specific journal, would you still have access to the content from the years when you did subscribe? And so this can really be helpful, again, as we look at that J4 counter file, which tells you which years were the articles your researchers wanted published. And so you can say, even if I cancel the subscription, I may still have access to those years through my post-termination access rights. Typically, you have the rights to the material published in the year in which you subscribed. Even if you cancel going forward, you would still have maybe 2024, 2023, 2022, and so on, going back in time to whenever your subscription started. So post-termination access can really unlock a greater deal of projected fulfillment of usage that still is going to be met, even if you were to cancel a subscription for the next year. And we'll look at that when we get to the modeling page. The last thing in the setup tab is maybe a filter. So maybe you only wanted to look at a certain number of rows. And so in this example, I went ahead and again uploaded the ISSNs of the 307 journals that were actually eligible to be analyzed in this particular package. So this is really the hardest part of using Unsub. The hardest amount of work for the person setting this up is getting all these things configured. Once you have the setup, then you can pop over to the Forecast tab and start working on a scenario. So you can add new scenarios here. I just have one I've called First, and this is where we start to see kind of the main Unsub page. So I typically will like to start with nothing subscribed. So I'm going to take all these away. So here we go. So now Unsub takes all that information from the counter files, the price list, the post-termination access, the open access, it thinks, and it projects a cost per use for each individual journal. So each of these boxes is a separate journal title. So let's look at maybe Research in Veterinary Science. Let's see what Unsub thought about our usage here. So Unsub goes beyond a simple cost per use, which you may be familiar with, which is just the cost of the subscription divided by the number of downloads, a cost per use. Unsub takes into account other forms of demand. So you have the downloads, which you get from the counter files. You also have citations and authorships that Unsub will use the Open Alex database to project. So that's why it's important to connect your Unsub account to a specific university or consortia, as we'll see in just a second, because then it knows how often researchers from that university or consortium are active in this journal. And that's another measure of demand, how important something is to your campus and your research community. So for this particular title, Research in Veterinary Science, Unsub says we downloaded 1,025 times over the next 5 years. So another important thing to keep in mind is that everything in Unsub is projected forward for the next 5 years and then averaged over those 5 years. And that's what the numbers that we're looking at here. So Unsub says we project that you'll download content from this journal 1,000 times in 2025, 1,000 times in 2026, 1,000 times in 2027, 1,000 times in 2028. So you can see more of that on the timelines tab over here and how things break down. I'll jump back to this simpler summary view right now. Unsub projects 41 citations by researchers from your university or consortium to content in this journal per year over the next 5 years. So 41 next year, 41 the year after, 41 the year after that, and so on and so forth. And we weight that by 10. So that means one citation is worth 10 downloads, and it projects one authorship. So one paper published in this journal each year for the next 5 years. And that is weighted at 100. So one authorship is worth 100 downloads. We do all that math, we roll it up, and it gets to what they call the weighted overall use. So 1,532, and that represents the total demand, taking into account downloads and citations and authorships. And so this is kind of the a bigger picture of how often this journal gets used. Unsub then takes into account the open access. So even if you canceled the subscription, some of these papers are still free to read. And so in this particular example, 4% of those uses, so 68 of those 1,532 uses could be met through open access. And in this example, a whopping half, a little over half of those uses could be met through the back file, which is that post-termination access information that you provided. So things from previous years that you already own. Now, as time goes forward, that back file will get less and less valuable, or less and less, contribute less and less into the fulfillment because you've stopped accumulating those past years of content. But right now, it's probably the best it's going to look. So half of those uses could be filled through back file, even without subscribing. That leaves 687 uses left that the paywall will unlock for you. Next, we look at the cost. So the base cost for this title per year is $2,000. Unsub takes into account if you were to cancel this journal, you're still going to spend something through interlibrary loan costs. That's ILL. So the alternative to subscribing is not zero. The alternative to subscribing is how would you alternately fulfill the researcher demand. And Unsub projects some of that demand will come through interlibrary loan requests, And so it says about $400 in ILL cost. And so that means the net above that would be 1,647. And then it takes 1,647 divided by the net paywalled uses, 687. Yeah, it's here. So that's how we get about $2.40 per use. And so that's a pretty economical journal. That's a decent deal. And so you might want to consider subscribing to that. So every one of these boxes is a journal. They all have the math breakdown, the cost breakdown, and show you how they've arrived at the cost per use number. Some of these get less economical. So in this example, it looks to me, the back file is giving us quite a lot here. So maybe phytochemistry researchers are accessing older material, so that makes the current paywalled subscription period a little less attractive. And so $11,000 for 130 paywalled uses is $87 per use, and so on. Here in these bars, you can see kind of the summary. So it projects about 10% to be fulfilled with open access, about half of the total package, the total 307 titles, to be filled with post-termination access. And we can start adding these titles in. You'll see the subscription now is starting to play a role in getting researchers access. And this little tiny bar here is the ILL. I think if I click that, yep. So we're still going to have to use some ILL for the journals that we have not subscribed to. All of these metrics are customizable here if you go into the parameters tab. So we can say, how fast will the title by title price grow? Do you want to consider different forms of open access fulfillment? And so bronze, green, academic social networks like ResearchGate or academia.edu. Do you want to consider that? You can turn that on or off. Here's where you configure the interlibrary loan costs. So how much will each request cost you to fulfill, and how often do researchers actually go through the step of submitting an interlibrary loan request? And then here's where you can change the 10 and 100 citation and authorship weights. If you wanted to consider an authorship to be more or less valuable than a download, and similarly for citations. So everything is customizable, and you can change the weightings. I would recommend if you change the weightings, just make it consistent between all the publishers. So you're not analyzing the Elsevier package with 10 and 100, but you're analyzing the Springer package with 5 and 1,000 or something. Make your decisions consistent with each other. You can also export all the data. So you can download a CSV file that gives you all the underlying information behind each one of those journals. And then I actually was able to write a Python script for something called Unsub extender, which helps you to analyze that exported file even deeper than this main screen here. So that's a whirlwind tour kind of what Unsub is and does, all the information it can provide to you. This is looking at one university at a time, but as I understand it, you also are a consortium. And so I'll briefly pop over to what a consortial view is. This is a group of universities at the same time. And so we can do the same thing. We upload the counter information. We can set the same parameters here, but now we've got different institutions. So you can see we're rolling up the usage, the downloads, the citations, and the authorships of all these universities at the same time. So maybe you've got big universities or small schools, right? Different schools will have kind of different emphasis areas. So maybe the nursing school wants a separate set of journals, or a different title is more important to them than, say, Medium University A or whatever. You can turn each one of these off if you'd like to kind of make a forecast for a subset. But again, each one of these boxes is a title, and then you can see how the usage and the projections break down for each institution within the consortia. So you can see Test Big University has the most usage in this particular title, Nano Energy, and so on and so forth. Maybe down here, this title isn't as important to Test Small University, and so it wouldn't be as good of a deal. But if you're doing a combined big bundle, perhaps it's acceptable to them. So in closing, there's a lot of information provided by Unsub. You give it the counter files and the price list, the post-termination access, and Unsub goes out and gets more measures of demand. It adjusts the price, and then it does a more detailed cost per use calculation, and then graphs everything on this cost per use histogram to let you make better informed choices, help you to understand what actually is being used on your campus, and hopefully to make your collections budget use much stronger. So thanks very much. And I hope you enjoyed this quick tour of Unsub.